Welcome back. Now, if you've ever opened your CeMAP textbook and come across the word Gilts and then read it and your head has fallen off, you are not alone. This video is for you. I'm going to break down everything that we need to know from a CeMAP 1 perspective when it comes to Gilts. And let's start off by talking about what actually is a Gilt. Now, in its simplest form, a Gilt is where an investor, that might be you, me, a financial institution, is going to lend money to the government in exchange for an interest rate return. So gilts are effectively government borrowing. It's another way that the government can raise money other than raising our taxes. Now, the name itself comes from gilt-edged securities, and the reason that they are called gilt-edged securities is because they used to look like this. And what you'll be able to see here is that that piece of paper is lined in gold. So gold edged, gilt edged. Obviously they don't look like that anymore because we have the internet and that's generally where people tend to invest. But back in the good old days, that's what they used to look like. So when you buy a gilt, you are effectively lending money to the government, and in return, they are going to promise to pay you an interest rate, which is usually done twice a year, and at the end of that term, you get your full amount back. So if you buy a £15,000 gilt, at the end of the term of your investment, you will get your £15,000 back. But let's break that down a little bit further. So first of all, you lend money to the government for an agreed period of time. In exchange for lending that money to the government, and kind of as a thank you, they are going to give you a regular interest payment, generally paid every 6 months, and this is called a coupon. So when you hear the word coupon, you need to remember that this is the interest rate return on the money that you lend to the government. And there's a few key things that I need to point out here. The first one being that gilts are very, very low risk. So we can assume that the government aren't going to go bankrupt anytime soon. That means that gilts are considered to be one of the safest investments that we can make. Now, what do we know about investments and risk? Generally, the higher the risk, the higher the potential reward. So if we know that gilts are super low risk, we can also assume that there is therefore a low reward or a low interest rate payment. Now, that interest rate payment is generally fixed. It's called a coupon, and you always have a fixed redemption date. So for example, if you bought a gilt and it was 5% interest rate and it expired in 2030, what that would mean is that every 6 months you would get a 5% interest rate return on your gilt, and by the time it gets to 2030, you would get your initial investment amount back. Remember, that's called the redemption date. Now, gilts can be traded, and I'm actually going to come onto that in a little bit more detail in a second, but one of the biggest things that tends to trip people up in their CeMAP exam that I want to talk about now is how gilts are categorized, because this tends to come up for everybody. And we've got two big institutions at play here. First of all, we have a department called the Debt Management Office. They work for Treasury in government. And we also have the financial press. And where it gets a little bit tricky is that the Debt Management Office and the financial press categorize gilts differently. So gilts are always categorized by how many years they have to run. As in, when are you going to get your money back? When is that redemption date? And the Debt Management Office categorize gilts in two different ways. First of all, you can have what's called a short-dated gilt. Now, a short-dated gilt means that your redemption date is going to be anywhere between the next 0 to 7 years, or it could be a medium-dated gilt, which means it would be redeemed anywhere between 7 and 15 years. So when you go shopping for a gilt, you can have either short-dated or medium-dated gilts with the Debt Management Office. The financial press, who are the guys that report on gilts that are being... Now, the financial press, on the other hand, they don't issue gilts, they report on the gilts that are being issued. And for some reason, they categorize gilts slightly differently. So they can either have short-dated gilts, which have anywhere between 0 to 5 years to run, medium-dated, which is anywhere between 5 and 15 years, and they also have an extra category called long-dated gilts, and long-dated gilts are effectively categorized as 15 years plus. Now, a really handy way for you to remember this for your exam is I want you to look at the word financial press. You've got the two S's at the end, I want you to replace those S's with 5s, because what you'll actually notice is that there is a 5 in every single category. You've got 0 to 5, 5 to 15, or 15 plus. And that's a really handy way for you to remember the financial press difference. Now let's move on to talking about gilts and tax, because gilts come with a little bit of a tax perk, and we've got two different kind of potential taxes at play here. The first one is on the coupon, so remember that is your regular interest rate return. Now that income is classed as savings income, and what that means is if you are over your annual allowance, you will be taxed at your income tax banding, whatever that is, whether it's 20%, 40% or 45%. And what we need to remember is that at the end of your gilt term, you get your money back, right? So if you've lent the government £15,000 for 10 years, at the end of the 10 years, you have your redemption date, you get that money back. Now you don't pay tax on that money that's returned to you. They are capital gains tax exempt. We probably wouldn't expect to pay tax at that particular point. However, I mentioned before that you can actually sell on your gilt, and I want to finish by talking about that. So let's imagine 5 years ago, you bought a gilt for 15 years with a 5% interest rate return. Now I want to buy a gilt today. I can go onto the Debt Management Office's website and I'll notice that actually they're only offering 2.5% interest rate returns. So would I rather buy a new gilt from the Debt Management Office, or would I rather buy your gilt with a 5% interest rate over a 2.5% interest rate? It's a no-brainer, right? I'd rather have yours. So if you were to sell me that gilt, usually because you've sold your investment, you would be liable for capital gains tax at that point if you've made a profit, which you probably would do. However, gilts are capital gains tax exempt, which makes them massively more attractive to investors. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was something called index linking. Now you can buy gilts where instead of having a fixed interest rate return, actually your interest rate works in line with inflation. So over the last few years, we've seen quite an exponential increase in inflation and the cost of living. If you have an index-linked gilt, you're kind of laughing with that one, because what it means is your interest rate return will go up in line with inflation. And if you want more help with your CeMAP studies, make sure you go and check out everything that's available on my website, from independent e-learning packages that you can self-study, or even a 6 weeks to CeMAP course, which means you don't have to take any time off work, and I will keep you accountable with drop-in sessions over a 6-week period and get you through your exam at the end of it. The link's in my bio. Let's get you exam ready.